Look, the fundamental problem with Obamacare is not one that the Supreme Court is going to engage in, although, of course, it should. And that is the question which is at the heart of all this, and that is healthcare a right? Do you, by being alive, somehow you have an inalienable right to receive healthcare, to receive the services of doctors and nurses and insurance companies and MRIs and all this stuff? Because that's really the argument. The left, for the last well over 50 years, have been arguing that yes, healthcare is a right. You have a right to life. Therefore, in order to be alive, you need to have good healthcare, and therefore, healthcare is a right. And if healthcare is a right, then it's something that the government has to provide, right? If you have a right to something by your very nature, then people have to provide it for you. And therefore, it's just a question now about how do we allocate resources to provide the best healthcare to whom and when. And it's a collective proposition because all of us need healthcare. And now it's a proactive thing the government has to do in order to and Obamacare is really geared towards that. And really, healthcare policy over the last 50 years has been geared towards how do we manipulate the system to maximize health benefits to people because they have a right to it. They're supposed to get it. Now, I think we understand or should understand that it can't be a right. You cannot have a right to other people's stuff. You cannot have a right to other people's talents. You cannot have a right to other people's wealth, to other people's skills, to other people's time, right? So you cannot have a right to the doctor's expertise or to the doctor's time. You have to pay for that. You have to engage in a voluntary exchange with the doctor. You can have a right to get an MRI. The MRI belongs to somebody. They get to set the terms by which you get to engage in a transaction with them. The right that you have in America, indeed, I think Obamacare violates this. The right to life as it applies to healthcare is you have a right in America to choose the doctor that you can afford and with whom you can engage in a voluntary transaction. The government has no right to tell you which doctor to choose and which doctor not to choose. You have a right to buy and take the medication that you believe and your doctor you believe at the end of the day is going to make you better. And the government doesn't have a right to tell you, oh no, you can't do that because the FDA hasn't approved it. You should have a right to be able to, as long as you can afford it, get whatever treatment you want, as long as you can find somebody who is willing voluntarily to engage in that treatment and to provide you with the services. That's what it means to have a right to life. It means a right to action. It means a right to go out there and engage voluntarily with services and products with other people in a trade relationship. Obamacare throws that completely out. The whole premise of Obamacare is it's a collectivized right. It's the notion that we are going to have committees who are ultimately going to decide what's good for you and what's not good for you, what's best medical practices and not best medical practices. We're going to reward doctors who treat you based on what the government thinks you should be treated and penalize doctors who don't. We're going to all in the name of cost saving and efficiency and all this stuff. And that is a massive violation of all of our rights. And I wish that's what the Supreme Court was discussing. But of course, if that was the level at which the Supreme Court was discussing these things, the world we'd be in would be completely different. Because when they get to the point where they understand that government force on us, where government limiting our options, where government telling us what is good for us and what is not good for us is a violation of our rights, then that completely destroys the premise behind the whole mixed economy, completely destroys the premise behind statism and collectivism. And that would mean a new era for this country. And I think we're a long way from that premise. I do think, though, what they are discussing is important, even though it's narrow. This idea that the government typically says you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And in most of the cases, they say that it's wrong. They have no business in saying that. It's a violation of my right in them restricting. But now with the mandate, what the government is saying, we're going to force you to do X. Now, the government already does that in many ways, but this is maybe the most grandiose and certainly the most public way in which this has happened. And if an argument can be made to the Supreme Court that telling people they have to buy insurance is unconstitutional, That'll be terrific. Because if the Supreme Court accepts that, then what it has done is accepted a limit on the growth of the power of government. It's accepted that government is limited in some respect. Now, we can then argue where those limits should be, and of course, they'll have too narrow a view of the way in which government should be limited. But at least it's a beginning. At least it's a sense that, yes, certain things the government cannot do. On the other hand, if the Supreme Court decides that the mandate is constitutional, it's basically saying there are no limits to what the government. There is no constitution. The Constitution's out. It's meaningless. There's no limit to what the government can do, at least in the economic realm. They can force you to buy this. They can force you to sell that. They can manipulate everything. They can dictate all the terms. And that there is no principle by which, in the economic realm at least, we can start limiting what government is to do or not. And in that sense, they'd be throwing the Constitution out. It would be meaningless. So I think this is a really, really important case. So, whether this is the most important case of the last few decades, I'm not a legal expert to say. But it's certainly one of the most important cases that I remember facing the Supreme Court. And I very, very much hope that they will decide that the mandate is unconstitutional and that government is limited by the Constitution in some ways as they apply to the economy. And then the debate we can change the debate. Then we can start arguing, oh, you get that. Well, let me tell you about how we really should be limiting, and that is limiting government to the protection of individual rights, which means that their only job is to protect us from criminal and fraud in the marketplace, and that they have no role in regulating and telling us what's good for us and what's bad for us and what we cannot do and what we should do and all of the other stuff that we understand. This would be a wedge, just a beginning of a dialogue. If they don't allow for the wedge, then this country is going to sink further, much further into statism and government intervention in the economy. So I think it's a big, big case, and I think we'll be talking a lot more about it as they approach a decision in June, and once they make a decision. Actually, just a plug for OCON this year. At OCON, which is the Objectivist Conferences, which is going to be held in San Diego in July, we're going to have a panel. And I think the Supreme Court is going to decide this case just a few weeks before, so we'll have a fresh decision from the Supreme Court. We've got some great panelists to really understand both the legal, philosophical, and practical implementations of Obamacare and the individual mandate. So I think just for that panel, it's worth coming to OCON. I think it'll be a really exciting event. I think also a lot of these, or some of these, are going to be live streamed. So if you can't make it OCON, hopefully you'll sign up for the live stream package and be able to see the panel.